stage, I want to invite our very distinguished speaker, Senge Sering. He's the founder and current head of the Washington, D.C. based Institute for Gilgit Baltistan Studies. He was born, of course, in Pakistan Occupied Gilgit Baltistan. He writes a lot. Many of you might have read about it, the sufferings of the people in the region. He has extensively lectured on that, on many of those aspects. So without further ado, I just want to invite Senge to please give us your insight on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, leading into good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much, Dr. Safu. It's an honor to be here among our friends. Invited me, and I'm really moved with the personal stories of Khalida and Nisar about Afghanistan and about the Pandit community that you brought forward. So thank you so much for sharing your personal experience with us. My name is Senge Sering. I come from Gilgit Baltistan. If you look at the map, this is where I was born. Right now, it is shown as part of India because constitutionally India claims the entire Jammu and Kashmir. But the line is drawn somewhere here called line of control, where the land on the other side of the line of control is in Pakistani occupation. And you can see we share a border with Afghanistan. There's about a 9-mile distance here, then Tajikistan is right there, so immediate neighbors. Xinjiang in Chinese occupation is right there, where the Uyghurs are facing genocide right now. This is the Afghan area that is in Pakistani occupation right now that Nisar was talking about. And this is where the CPAC comes from China, from Xinjiang, into Gwadar, into Balochistan and Sindh. So you can see that without this land in Pakistani occupation, China would not have a CPAC going through Pakistan. Pakistan would not have an ally in the form of China. So I think extremely important to learn about the geography of Gilgit Baltistan in context of rest of India. One thing that I would like to mention is that India, with a billion strong people, could have had access to the natural resources in Central Asia, like oil and gas and other resources in Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, if this border was open. India would not have been dependent on Iran, or the Arab countries through different sea lanes. So I think this area is also very important for, apart from the fact that historically it is part of India, from the economic point of view, extremely important for India as well. Afghanistan would have shared a direct border with India if Gilgit-Baltistan was still part of India. And that would have made a huge difference in how we deal with terrorism, how we deal with Taliban. So right now, because India does not have a border with its ally Afghanistan, they have to go through Iran, which is not a very predictable and dependable ally. Iran itself is promoting terrorism in Afghanistan, as we all know. It has made a life for the United States very difficult while dealing with terrorist organizations there. So while we're looking at Pakistan, China, Taliban nexus, we should not forget that, the fact that India does not have an access to Afghanistan is also allowing Iran to play the game, against the interest of against the peace in the entire region. Now, removal of Article 370, it kind of changed how we look at Kashmir. The fact that all the regimes before Prime Minister Modi, starting all the way from Nehru to Prime Minister Modi, they wanted to remove Article 370, but they did not have the capacity to do that. And the fact that Prime Minister Modi was able to do that, it completely changed how the rest of the world perceived India's relationship with Kashmir. But it also changed, like if I want to talk about myself, so it also changed how the people in POK look at Senge Sering. Because I don't know if you guys know me or not, but I was the only person who came openly in support of what PM Modi did by removing Article 370, and I was, jubilant, like I was on the Indian TV channel, and I was expressing my happiness as if I don't know, a soccer fan from Real Madrid or Barcelona won a match. And so I think it was very emotional for me And everyone in POK, you know, they kind of like tried to disassociate with me because they wanted to condemn PM Modi, like, you know, all the nationalists, pro-Pakistanis, pro-independence, even those people who had sympathies for India, they wanted to condemn PM Modi for removing Article 370. And if we look at today, like right now when we're speaking, talking about this nexus, you know, yesterday or day before yesterday when the Taliban leader in Beijing, right? We saw like, you know, the photo up there and Qureshi, you know, being very proud of how he has connected. Just like, you know, look at back how Kissinger was able to use Pakistan and, you know, China and United States formed bond, which had its own pros and cons. But today, you know, Pakistan is doing the same thing, trying to connect Taliban and China. So if you look at this, you would, even the people in this country, the liberals in this country, for instance, the people who are in government right now with the Democratic Party, they would acknowledge the vision and the foresightedness of Prime Minister Modi. Because with the Article 370 still intact, you know, this relationship that is evolving would have played it very differently when you look at Kashmir and Pakistan's influence in Kashmir. I mean, if you look at one force, one country, one institution that has the capacity to promote terrorism in the entire region. You know, sometimes when we look at Article 370, our, you know, thought process just restricts us back to like this small area. But the fact is that one institution, the Pakistan Army, has the capacity to inflict pain in the entire region. And if you look at how Pakistan Army was drawing its energy, its oxygen, its you know, economic force from within the country, from the taxpayers, all the budget, maybe 25-30% of the budget that it was consuming to promote terrorism in the entire region, the biggest excuse that it was using was obviously Kashmir. It was in the name of Kashmir that Pakistan Army was able to sustain itself as the major player in the country, not the prime ministers, not the presidents, not the governors and chief ministers, but the Pakistan Army was the player. You know, if the United States wanted to talk, who would they go and talk? General Bajwa, because they know he's the decision maker. So how did they get all this leverage? It was in the name of Kashmir, in the name of, you know, two-nation theory, in the name of India being a huge threat through Kashmir, right? So, and what was giving Pakistan Army that veto in Kashmir? This is, you know, I'm slowly leading you to like how Pakistan Army, despite the fact that, yeah, I mean, entire nation was, you know, backing Pakistan in the name of Islam and Kashmir, but how was Pakistan Army so influential on the land, in the valley, which was in Indian control, where hundreds and thousands of Indian soldiers are stationed, and yet it is the Pakistan Army which was calling the shots? How? It was because of Article 370. Why? Because Article 370 gave the veto power to the Kashmiri leaders, not all the Kashmiris, the Kashmiri-speaking Muslims. And they could dictate terms to New Delhi how to deal with Kashmir, how to deal with Pakistan. It was not New Delhi trying to, you know, like play an independent role and how to try to overcome the terrorist attacks that Pakistan was, you know, inflicting, and, you know, the pain and misery on the Kashmiris. No, it was the leadership of Muftis and Abdullahs guiding and dictating terms to New Delhi how to deal with Pakistan. It was because of this. This gave them the absolute authority over New Delhi, because New Delhi could not do anything in the valley without the approval of the local assembly. And who had the majority in the local assembly, despite the fact that demographically they are a minority, they still had a majority in the assembly, so they did not need, you know, support of other ethnic and racial and religious groups to pass laws in the assembly in Kashmir. It was because of this. So now you go back, you know, and draw yourself back and look at the bigger picture. Like, all that oxygen and power that the Pakistani military was drawing to inflict pain in Afghanistan and threatening Central Asia, threatening, other countries, India, extending its tentacles in Nepal, Rohingyas, talk about the bigger picture. It was all coming through their relationship with the Muftis and Abdullahs and Hurriyat Conference and your Mujahideen and Jamaat Islami stationed in the valley enjoying the veto power because of Article 370. So if India wanted to really deal with terrorism and really look at, what is the main problem, which country, which organization, which institution is the main culprit, they could not deal with that situation directly because it had repercussions and consequences back, because of this in the valley. India's own relationship with Kashmir could be, jeopardized because of that. So I think this is something that we need to look at why it was so important. There are other factors, we can talk about, for instance, secularism. What kind of secularism were we talking? Dr. He brought some references to the women rights, for instance. But look at this way. The Muslims in India, especially the Kashmiris, claim that India is a secular country. So in a secular country, irrespective of who is a majority, who is a minority, racial or ethnic or religious group, everyone has the right to be the prime minister or the president of the country, right? I have no problem, following that idea. But come back to the Kashmir Valley, right? In the Jammu and Kashmir state, in the last 72 or 73 years, they have never allowed any non-Muslim to be the chief minister of Jammu and Kashmir. Forget about non-Muslim. They have never allowed anyone who is from a different racial group other than the Kashmiri. So they are Dogras, right? Muslim Dogras. They're Muslim Pahadis. They're Muslim Punchis, right? They're Muslim Hindko speakers. They're Muslim Ladakhis. They're Muslim Kishtwaris. No, only a Kashmiri language speaking person became a chief minister. What gave them the power? Article 370. So what kind of democracy is this when we come to the Kashmir? It suddenly becomes a Kashmiri language speaking dominated Sharia, enforced area, where only a Muslim and a Kashmiri speaking Muslim has the authority to be chief minister, but the same Kashmiri then goes to Delhi and say everyone should have equal rights. This is the double standards that we were dealing with for the last 70, 75 years. I am a Muslim. I come from Gilgit Baltistan. What really pains me, so a lot of people say, Senge, you're not from the valley, you're irrelevant, right? Okay, I'm from Jammu and Kashmir, but you're not from the valley. You're not from the Indian side. Why do you talk about this so much? I talk about this so much because the country, Pakistan, that has been, promoting Article 370 and how it has, caused so much pain to the Kashmiris, have been changing demography in Gilgit Baltistan without international community paying much attention to it, right? So if India removed Article 370 in 2019, which could lead to other Indians settling in the Kashmir Valley, for instance, and changing the demography, Pakistan started doing that in Gilgit Baltistan in 1950s, right? So 1950s to 2020, that's 70 years. Pakistan has been doing the same in Gilgit Baltistan for 70 years, and it had the nerve to stand up for the so-called, Muslims of Kashmir Valley in 2019 without realizing that international community might go and look at the records of Pakistan itself violating all those norms and regulations that Pakistan wants India to respect in the Kashmir Valley, right? So this is really hurts me, angers me that Pakistan should not be given that role. Not by China, not by the Muslim countries, not by the United States, not by United Nations, any country to pretend or act like attorney or a lawyer, defending the case of Kashmiris. Because all the violations that Pakistan talks about, it has been committing in Gilgit Baltistan. All of you know about the Shia genocide in Gilgit Baltistan, right? We know about the Pandit genocide. We also know about, how Pakistan has been committing violations against people in Mirpur, Muzaffarabad. Yet, What Pakistan is trying to do is keep all its focus on the valleys and nobody pays attention to the violations on its own side. So I think this is something that, what forced me to come in open support of removal of Article 370. And despite the fact that, Ladakh has been separated because of this from Jammu and Kashmir. So the Kashmiri-speaking ethnic group is not controlling Ladakh anymore. That's another good thing that came out of it. So the money that is being pumped into Ladakh right now directly from Delhi is bringing a lot of development there. We saw a lot of, road infrastructure being built, for instance. We now see a lot of work being done in the telecommunications sector. A lot of money that the Ladakhis can, work and formulate policy for their own region and decide what is good for them, and not a Kashmiri-speaking, somebody's Muslim sitting in Srinagar deciding what is good for Ladakh and what is not. That has changed. That is a good thing. I also stand for Jammu becoming a separate state. I think Jammu has all the right to defend its own identity. They should not be forced to learn and use Urdu as official language. They should have their own right to have their own languages taught in the schools and promote their own cultures. This is the same that I stand for Gilgit Baltistan. So I think removal of Article 370 has given Gilgit Baltistan a lot of hope, because we are connected with Ladakh, not Jammu and Kashmir anymore. So we look at Ladakh as a model how Ladakh would develop, and eventually I think that would benefit Gilgit Baltistan. And removal of Article 370 will help the international community realize that Pakistan Army is not as strong anymore as far as the Kashmir politics is concerned. So hopefully the Pakistan Army will change its behavior. It will open the routes. There will trade that will flourish. It will, in the short term, we don't see that. It will abandon the policy of using terrorism as a means of earning and financial stability. But in the long run, we hope that this region will become a region of peace instead of conflict, and tourism, and a region, that is civilizationally connected with India, and we'll be able to see some good things happening in the near future. Thank you so much for inviting Dr. Sapro, and thank you all of you for
thank you so much. You touched upon some